My name is Peter Spielvogel. I'm joined with my friend and colleague, Tobias Queck. I'm responsible for product marketing for UX engineering, and Tobias is the chief architect for UX engineering. So between the two of us, we should be able to cover pretty much any question that you have for us. Today's session is building SAP Fiori Apps quickly and simply. We may talk about some things in the future, so don't make any purchasing decisions based on that information. We're going to talk about three main things. TechEd is chock full of great information. You've probably been to a lot of sessions before this, so there are three things that you need to remember from this session, or that I'd like you to remember. There will be a quiz at the end, and there is a great prize if you get the answers right on this. So the first thing to remember is that UX transformation drives agility. What do I mean by that? If you put someone in front of a screen that's old, it's going to reinforce old ways of thinking. They're not going to be able to innovate. If you're trying to bring new people into your company to get fresh ideas and drive new businesses, if you put them in front of a SAP GUI screen, they probably will not be at their creative best. So UX transformation is critical for that. Point two is that SAP offers many options for UX transformation, as SAP offers many options for most things. There is no silver bullet for UX transformation. It's going to take some work. We're going to present two of the easiest, fastest ways to transform your user experience today. The last one is start today to build your intelligent enterprise. Markets change quickly. There's lots of disruption. Your competitors aren't standing still. You've seen lots of change in your industry already. If you wait until all the technology pieces are in place, until you think everything is ready to change, it might be too late. So it's not to say transform your entire UX overnight, but you do need to start today with something. And we'll talk about how to figure out what scenario and so on as we get into the presentation. So you can take a picture of this if you'd like. It might help you with the quiz. It's open book, but quiz at the end with great prizes. Today we'll talk first about the UX strategy and why user experience is important for you and your enterprise. Then we'll talk about Fiori Elements. So after Fiori Elements, we'll talk about Screen Personas and then give you a concrete action plan of what you can do when you get back to your office to transform your user experience. So let's talk about Fiori. Most of the time people hear Fiori is, oh, it's the way the screens look and feel. That's a part of it. It's a big part of it, but it really goes much deeper than that. It's complete transformation of how people consume SAP. In the past, there was one big ERP system. Everyone went through and navigated it the same way. Fiori kind of pivots that, because now it's role-based, and instead of thinking of a series of transactions, you think about tasks that you need to do in the system, and those will be assigned to you based on your role. So the ERP that someone deals with in finance is going to be very different from what someone deals with in the warehouse. The Fiori launchpad they see is going to be completely different, with different tiles based on the specific roles that they need to do. In a lot of ways, it's very much like your smartphone. Everyone has access to millions of apps in the App Store, but depending on your role, what you do, if you're into music, sports, if you love photography, the apps you have on your phone are going to be very different from someone who has different interests and a different role. The way that people access SAP in the Fiori world is through the Fiori launchpad. That is a single entry point. You saw a little bit of that in the keynote yesterday when Jürgen talked about look at all these different looks and feels depending on whether you're going into Concur, SuccessFactors, S/4HANA. So Fiori, especially Fiori 3, aims to bring all of that together so there's one entry point for all things SAP. And for the purpose of this conversation, which is dealing with your ERP system, we're looking at SAP-delivered Fiori apps that you would download from the Fiori app reference library or get delivered with S/4HANA. It could be apps that you build yourselves with SAP Fiori Elements. It could be custom Fiori apps that you build or a partner builds for you using SAP UI5. Screen Personas, flavors, really anything web-based you will have access to through the Fiori launchpad. User experience, it's not just making the screens look nice, it delivers measurable business benefits, things you can add up that flow straight to your bottom line. So when we talk about improving business user productivity, we have many examples of customers who have saved significant 50%, 80% of the keystrokes by simplifying the user experience and moving to SAP Fiori. Increasing SAP adoption. One example there, a mill products company. There used to be one group of users. The forklift drivers would enter their information into SAP, and the managers wanted nothing to do with SAP. Once they transformed the user experience to make the screens simpler and more intuitive, the manager said, oh, I need to know what's going on in my business. I need a license to SAP so I can run my department better. So you will see an increase in adoption, which of course helps you run your business better if everyone is entering information into the system of record. Obviously, if the screens are more simple, you can have less training time. We have a higher education customer who went from a 2-week SAP training for their maintenance workers who fix things around the campus down to 2 days. And not only did they shrink it by that much, after the 2 weeks of training, the people were still a little bit shaky on how comfortable they were using SAP. In the 2-hour training, within 1 hour, they were already entering work orders in the system for practice, and they left that training fully confident that they could do their jobs hands-on and handle the paperwork afterwards, which is usually not what the maintenance people really enjoy doing. Improving data quality is another nice side benefit. A little bit tougher to quantify. You can look at error rates and so on. We had one high-tech customer who had a master data screen for routing materials around their factory, and after simplifying the screen with Screen Personas, they removed 112 data fields from that master data. So you can imagine the impact on data quality when there's 112 fewer places that someone can put the wrong information or the right information in the wrong box. User satisfaction is obviously another benefit. People are happier if they're not frustrated with the screens, and reducing the cost of app development. We've had some of our partners who've told us that by using some of the tools, Fiori Elements and Screen Personas, they're able to cut development time by a factor of 10 at least. So some really good stuff, and you gain a lot of flexibility by rendering screens. If you are familiar with the SAP GUI screens, they're pretty complex. You wouldn't want to run it on your phone, even if you could. Now, Web GUI, we just announced, allows you to run screens on a tablet, and the Slipstream engine lets you run it on a tablet or a phone. Obviously, you'll want to simplify those screens first, and that's going to be part of the demo that you see very shortly. There's a couple of paths for you to get the Fiori user experience, and generally speaking, we're going to segment that by whether it's a brand new application, something that you're doing for the first time, or if you're simplifying an existing business scenario. So if you're looking at doing something net new, then Fiori Elements is probably the go-to solution, assuming that what you want to do fits into some of the page formats that Fiori Elements offers. Tobias is going to go into more detail on that. If your app doesn't fit that, then you can use UI5 and build literally anything you want. If you go out to the show floor, there's a lot of great examples of Fiori Elements screens as well as UI5 screens. You can see the difference and get a sense of what it took to get there. If it's something that the business process is not something brand new that you're doing, and it exists in the form of a transaction code and you just want to simplify it, Screen Personas will generally be the fastest, easiest, lowest cost, and lowest risk of getting you there. In addition, probably the first step, if you're looking at simplifying, moving to Fiori, would be take a look at the Fiori app reference library, and if you're not familiar with that, I will show it to you. How do I switch? Okay, so this is a Fiori app reference library. If you've not seen this before, you can get here just by going to Google and typing Fiori app reference library. Oh, not showing. No. So this is the app reference library. You get here by typing app reference library in Google. And when you get here, you'll see that there's a lot of choices. You can search by line of business and see different numbers of apps available depending on what the people in your organization want to do. You can also search by industry, and we've got different numbers of apps depending on the industry. There we go. Scroll through. So some industries have more than others, and probably for many of you, you're thinking, okay, well, I'm on ECC, what's available for me? Or if I'm on S4, there's a filter on the bottom. You can pull that up and have the opportunities to search here. So if I search by database and look at a non-HANA system, you'll see that there are 250 apps available to you. So certainly enough to get started with Fiori today. Even if you don't build anything, there should be some apps that you can start running right away. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Tobias to talk about Fiori Elements and building apps.
Thank you, Peter. So after Peter gave you that overview of what Fiori is and what ideas we have behind Fiori, let me now go back into specific examples. I would like to show you first what Fiori Elements is, and then show you a demo of how to build a Fiori Elements application. And then later on, we also look especially at you, our ECC customers, and show you a little more about SAP Screen Personas. But let's talk about Fiori Elements first. I only saw a few. There's a question. Oh, come on. To my embarrassment, I have to say that I was, for 20 years, a Windows user and just recently switched to Mac, and this one is still bothering me. Do you see me actually? Yes, you see me. Now we have a beautiful slide on again. So let me talk about Fiori Elements. What is Fiori Elements? Fiori Elements is our approach at SAP to streamline the application development. So you can imagine we as SAP, not just you as a customer, but we at SAP, we need to build Fiori applications. We want to build Fiori applications because we want to give the great experience that we have in our Fiori design system back to you. So if you start building these applications and you build 1, you build 2, you build 5, you build 10, you build 100, you learn a few things. And what we have learned pretty quickly is if you build 100 applications and have it done by 10 different development teams, these applications might not exactly look the same. Also, you might notice that some teams are faster than other teams, and you see, okay, there's maybe something where we have to work on streamlining the process. And something very interesting we noticed as well is that if you look at these 100 applications, 80% fit actually in the same paradigm and into the same patterns. And what we have done as a response to that, we have looked at these patterns. We have found the 5 main page types or floor plans that we saw in our application and decided to build this as a separate library, as our Fiori Elements library. So we have built a library that allows you to easily build an overview page like you see here on my screen, that allows you to build a list report page. List report page is usually a list of items that you can search, that you can filter, and then you can select a specific item, which brings you to an object page, a very detailed overview of specific objects. And then we have also noticed very many applications have a so-called work list. So you have something, a list of items that you have to do, or a list of issues that have to be handled, and these you want to get maybe with some predefined filters, and that's your work list. Many applications have this. Last but not least, analytical information became very handy, and we combined them also with the list views that you can get in the standard list report. And by having just these 5 page types, it sounds incredible to me, just 5 different page types, we were able to cover 80% of the applications that we're developing. And by having this page type centrally defined in our UX engineering team, we're actually making sure they are consistent. So now we have our 10 development teams all using our page types, and voila, all the applications actually have the same look and feel and follow the Fiori design language. Of course, also the design system is evolving over time. What do you usually do? If you build an application following one specification, then the specification changes in the future. You have to do some rework. Here again, by using our page types that we prepare for you, we take care of that work. So while Fiori design language evolves, we evolve our templates, our page types, and your application automatically evolves as well with the design language. So for us at SAP, that's a very useful thing that we're using. We're building up to 80% of our applications using the Fiori Elements templates or page types. And of course, there's also a little rest that we have to manually build, but 80% we can get covered with our page types. So the same then for you, when you start thinking about building your own applications, in 80% of the cases, in 4 out of 5, you will most likely also see that you can use our templates or page types here. Talking about these standard flows we have in the application, it became even more interesting to see that while we have that overview page with lots of different key information that you have, that was a part of the applications we saw, but most other applications simply always start with a list view. And then we have these 3 different flavors of the list, and then you usually have a pattern coming from a list view to an object page, from another object to another object. To be more precise, assume you search for sales orders. You first look at the list of sales orders, then you pick a specific sales order, and in there you might have items in your sales order that you also want to dig deeper and look at. And all this, if you think about, it's not just the page type that we give you, we also give you the navigation. So if you implemented once the navigation from one page to another, you understand, okay, that's how I do it. But if you have to manually do it for every single application, that's kind of not efficient, not productive for you. So we looked at it, we understand our backend services, we get the information from the backend, from the auditor service that tells us how objects are associated, and that's what we use to offer you a simple navigation path where you then can use our tools and simply say, I want to navigate from my sales order to my items, and voila, you already get that navigation underneath the templates that we're providing to you. So it's not just the single page templates, it's also the flow that we're helping you with. What is the result of all this? Really, it is development efficiency. And trust me, we at SAP, for us, it's critically important because I think we're the biggest producer of Fiori apps. And if we wouldn't be efficient, that would be expensive for us, which is, of course, not good for us. So development efficiency is one of the key aspects why we're using Fiori Elements so successfully internally. And we are also recommending it to you as a customer, as a partner, also to use it externally. And UX consistency, I can't underline that again and again because I can't underline it often enough because consistency is critically important for user experience. If you ask me as a personal user of any kind of software or application, the key piece for me is performance. If an app doesn't perform, that's a killer. But the next thing is consistency. If I have to search for a button, if I have to search for a confirm button or a save or a cancel button, then something is very wrong in an application. And if I'm in one application at SAP and then go to the next one, I simply expect consistency. And again, Fiori Elements enforces this consistency. Even if your developers would like to do it differently, if you would like to do it differently, Fiori Elements tries to enforce that you can't. Last but not least, enterprise readiness. Here again, if you build applications don't stop just right after development. You start testing, you go through a cycle, test again, build, do user research, and all that. I'm not saying that you don't need to do that with Fiori Elements. Yes, you still have to do that. But there are some parts that we are taking away from you. We are doing the main of the client-side development. So we are testing for you on client-side. We are testing for you if our templates, if our UI controls work in different browsers. All this is taken care on our side. So we provide enterprise readiness in this regard because you need to do less if you want to get your application ready to be rolled out in your whole enterprise. And best practices, as I mentioned, we at SAP use this library. So we are testing, we're trying, we find out if there are limitations, we find out if there's something not right, if something needs improvement, and we start improving it just for ourselves already, and you get that for free again. So there are several steps that make sure that you get high quality templates that you then can use for your application development. But I think that's enough talk about how or what it should be. I think I should show it to you now. But here, as you see in the upper right corner, that's very, very important. This is a lab preview that I'm showing to you now. So you can already today build Fiori Elements applications. You can use the SAP Web IDE. Here at TechEd, there are a few hands-on sessions that you can go to and learn how to do that. There's also lots of material out there, blog posts, SAP helps that explain exactly what you want to do. But what I want to show you today is actually a preview of what we are working on right now. So we have looked at the current development process for Fiori Elements applications, and it works well, it's good, but we also found out that there are some deficits in there. Some things could have been better. We got that feedback from our internal development, we got a feedback from you, and now we're looking at the topic of building Fiori applications from a new perspective again, and we're trying to reinvent, rebuild the tools so that you can use them in a way you want to use them, you can use them everywhere, and one personal goal for me is we want to make building Fiori application a joy. It should really be fun to develop a Fiori Elements-based application, and that's something we're trying to achieve to do. But again, enough talk, and now I'll get to the embarrassing moment again where I have to find out how to change my windows here. Yep. That is absolutely embarrassing. Do you guys realize how embarrassed I am about that? And now you should see my screen again. And what I'm doing now is I'm actually switching to Visual Studio Code. Do you guys know Visual Studio Code? Is there anybody in the room that has developed this Visual Studio Code before? Yes, one person, or two persons, three persons. All the others that didn't raise their hand, if you are a person who does web development, I strongly recommend to look at Visual Studio Code. And no, I'm not paid by Microsoft to say that. I say that because I love that tool. And many others also love that tool. And if you just don't want to rely on my opinion, it's really one of the hottest IDEs out there. Why is it so hot? Because it gives you lots of features already inbuilt. Text editing support, auto-completion, integration into language servers, and all this. But it also has a great marketplace where you can download extensions for specific things that you want to do in there. And we in UX engineering have decided that we want to make use of it and decided to build our Fiori Elements tools as a set of extensions that you can run locally in your Visual Studio Code. But don't worry, I'm not saying that there will be no Web IDE anymore. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. You might have heard already that the Web IDE team is also working on something called the SAP Application Studio, a hosted development environment. And all the extensions that we are building that I want to show you today are also planned to run in that hosted environment. So you can still use a completely hosted IDE if you like, but for people that want to have it locally, that want to run offline, we're also building it as extensions that you can run in Visual Studio Code. So I want to create a Fiori Elements application. That's what I said, right? So the first thing I'm doing here is I'm clicking on my TechEd folder and say I want to open the SAP UX application generator. The SAP UX application generator currently gives me two options. It tells me I can build a list report object page for version 2 of OData service and for version 4. I want to start with something for version 2. And I have one service running here that should have been my service here, but something looks weird. So I'm copying my service URL here one more time. Go back to my application generator. Now it looks better. And I'm connecting to my service here. My service requires authentication, so I say who I am. And what happens now is our application generator actually downloads the service metadata. So it gets all the information about the service in the backend down to my local disk so that I can start working with it. And it identified already that there's an entity in that service, which is a product entity, which is considered the main entity. So my application that I want to build today actually is an application for products, and it identified it correctly. You can also add some more navigation targets. So remember, I talked about a list report, can point to an object page, another object page, and so on. I can also pick this here automatically from the metadata I get from the service, but for now I'm actually good. I just want to create the application here. So we are in session 104. It should be a product app that I want to build today, and the namespace, let's just call it TechEd, and I can of course add more information here. What is happening now? Our application generator that has fetched the metadata from the server is now generating a full application, a full list report object page purely on the information that it got from the backend. And this application is now here in my folder, and there's also a little .SAP UX folder that is generated by our tools. I will get into more details about that later, but for now let's just see what has been created here. So I just click on Open Preview, and really without doing anything except saying this is my service, and I want to build today an application with a list report as a starting point, and as an an object page as a second page, I already get a functional application using Fiori elements. So I can click on Go here, my application goes to the backend, gives me some data back. So already just without doing anything except picking that I want to have a list report application, I get that result back. So of course I can also click on one item here. Oh, that would be my object page, and that object page actually looks a little empty. So I have a header here that is automatically populated, but the rest is missing here. So why is the rest missing? Because Fiori Elements was not able to find enough information in the backend about what should be shown as an object page. But that is no problem. That's why we are here. That's where we have our tools. Fiori Elements uses so-called OData annotations to find out what specific parts should be shown for a specific entity if you have an object page open, for example, or a list report. So for an object page, I can go also into my local annotation file here. That looks a little overwhelming on first glance. That is an EDMX file following the EDMX specification, but don't worry about it. I also don't remember what I have to type here. With our tools, I can pretty much press a control space here, and it gives me all the options of what I can do here. Pretty simple. At that point in time, I can only create an annotations item here, and it asks me for which target I want to create it. Again, I don't know anything. So I press Control Space, and it gives me all the services that my application is connected to. Obviously, we have only one service, so I pick this one. And now in this service, I want to pick the entity that I want to actually annotate. So if you remember, we had an object page for a product. So I have to pick the entity for that product here, and that should be here. So now I have a tag created for annotation that I can generate for that specific type. So how do I do this? Again, no clue. I press Control Space, and here is something called facets. Facets are actually little UI elements that can contain content that you can show somewhere. So that seems to be the annotation I have to create here for my object page. It generates a collection for me, so let me see what I can do here. I can create, for example, a reference facet, and this reference facet I can give a label. Let's say I want to give some information about the identification of my product object here. Here I have to define a technical ID for my application that's later generated, so let's call it ID facet. And last but not least, it asked me for an annotation path. So now it asks me what information should I actually show in that facet. And due to a little knowledge I have about OData and annotations, I know that the information about the identification of an object I can find in a different annotation, which is called UI identification. So they just select that one here. And now I've created a facet on my object page that will show me all the content that is combined in the UI identification annotation. It can also show a little more. We talked about products here. So maybe we can also show some sales data. So let's add something more sales data here. And the ID that I use is sales facet. And the annotation path. Let's find out what we can do here. So I'm seeing all the properties and associations on my product object here, and I see there's something called product sales data. I will use this. Let's see what it offers. Here it offers something like line items. Line item always indicate it's a list of items that I can show. So by just adding this and saving here, you see now something happening in my console. Our tools on the client side will generate or regenerate our client-side application, and I can quickly switch back to the browser, and you will already see that our object page now has more information on it, and just by simply creating these annotations that I just created. Now I would also like to get some more information about the sales data, but I can't really click here. So what I can do there is I can again go into our tools, and as mentioned before, there's a SAP UX folder that we created, and here there's some information about the structure of the application. But honestly, I don't remember what I have to type here, so we also have some visual tool support here. Now it's visualized for me that I have a list page here pointing to the product, and I have an object page pointing to the product. But what I actually like to do is I would like to have another object page pointing to the sales data. And somewhere here we should have product sales data. I'm pressing OK. I'm pressing Save over here. Again, our build process triggers everything and converts the changes we just made into the final application. We can go here. It will be refreshed. And if everything went well, you see here right now already navigation items, and I can click on it. And here would be my object page for the sales data, which is again sadly empty. But as before, now I could go back into my annotations, annotate the sales data object here, and then would get the same page here. So that's pretty much how you build the structure of a Fiori Elements-based application. And there's one thing I find super annoying on that screen here. Do you see that my list or my search is gone again? I would like to keep the search there. Let's go back into my editor here. In addition to the app.json, we also have a configuration for each page. And here I have a filter bar, I have a table. So the table didn't like what the table did. So let me check what I can do here. And oh yeah, here's something called enable auto binding. That sounds good. So I can simply set this to true, and that will make sure that later on my table data is already loaded right away. But if you now wonder, how should I ever know which property to set? Again, no big deal. You can simply type help in here, and we get our SAP UX help, and you get some guidance here how you enable specific things. For example, maybe we also want to have an export to Excel. So here's some screenshots showing you, explaining what to do. Honestly, I don't want to read that. I just want to click apply, and then all the changes required for it will be set over here. I confirmed it by pressing save. So now I can go back into my browser, and we see that first of all my data is loaded, which I find beautiful. And second of all, I can also export my data to Excel as I just configured here. So that's pretty much our new tool suite. Right now, we have spent 2 to 3 months of development in there. So we're at the very beginning, but we are quite proud already of the things that we can achieve. And we want to drive that further to really give you a really nice development experience for Fiori Elements-based applications. And now comes embarrassing display switch again. And I'm going back to my PowerPoint slide. So that is Fiori Elements-based development with our new tool suite. But of course, I mentioned before, you can only cover roughly 80% of your cases with it. So there are still some cases where you do need freestyle development. But why shouldn't you always do freestyle development? You should always, in my opinion, to look at a few key points there. So first of all, ease of development. You want to have it as easy as possible to build the application you need. If the application target fits into the page types that we have in Fiori Elements, ease of development is on Fiori Elements side. That's something I would definitely recommend you to go. If you need more flexibility, if you need an application that looks totally different, there are ways in Fiori Elements also to achieve this. We can allow you some custom extensions in JavaScript. You can create your own controls in there. That's all possible. But at this point in time, I would already say, if you have a very different looking application, you're better off if you build your freestyle application using UI5 or using a different UI framework that you prefer more. The difference then in the end is the costs. Because of the Fiori Elements application, it's usually less costs, but you're limited to the floor plans we're giving to you, compared to the more freestyle app, which costs a little more because you have to do full-blown development, but you also have the flexibility there. So it's always a choice for you, and only you can decide when to use Fiori Elements and when to use freestyle applications. So there was a question in the audience, is it also possible to go a hybrid approach? Yes, it is. So that is where our extensions come into the game. So if you, for example, have a list report and you feel whenever you send a request to the backend to get the information, you need to do something manually on client side. There needs to be some calculation or maybe something different on the UI. You can create an extension, and then this extension will be called at specifically well-defined extension points, and you can do your implementation there. So if you just deviate a little from our floor plans, yes, there are extensions that I recommend to look at. So the follow-up question now is there are specific extension points, or can I do everything I want? There is an extension point API that we want you to use, because then you stay in the realm of what we support, what we can help you with. But technically, you are going into a JavaScript development world where you have quite some freedom, but there's always a risk when you take that freedom and then things change that you are not supposed to read or write to, your application might break. So I would always recommend stay in the realm of the well-defined APIs. So the next follow-up question was, what if I have specific scenarios like in a sales order, depending on the order type, I want to have different look and feels on my screen. That's an interesting scenario. That is something where we would have to evaluate. Is it easily doable with an extension? Is it something where you could define multiple object pages and switch easily? That is something you would have to look into and see if it makes sense, or if you're better off doing that freestyle. I don't have an exact answer for you right away. So that was one possibility for you to get to the Fiori experience in an easy and an efficient way using Fiori Elements. There's also another possibility which is called SAP Screen Personas. And SAP Screen Personas is especially important for you if you are not yet an S/4HANA customer and if you're using still lots of our good old transaction codes like our VA transaction and so on. So you're all smiling, or not smiling. So I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So if you're still using these, then SAP Screen Personas is a great option. Out of the box, without personas, we already also evolved our older transactions. So as you can see on the screen here, on the one side, you see how a classic transaction, that is actually VAO2 here, would look on an S4HANA system, that I think is an 1809 S4HANA system. So you see already the coloring, the theming, the do we see icons here? No, yeah, also the icons down there being applied from the Fiori 2 theme. You also see that the spacing is a little wider than in the classic UI. So there's already a few things we can ship you out of the box, and we do that, we try that, compared to the classic look on the ECC system, where you see still our older design guidelines. Also, with the next version of S4HANA, you will see the Fiori 3 theme being rolled out slowly, so you'll see the newer look and feel. But again, here, you're limited to S4HANA, and you're limited to generic changes that we can do on top of the applications without touching the application, because we can't touch the application code behind the scenes here. If you, as an ECC customer, now want to get the same kind of look and feel, then there's one good option for you, and that option is called the Slipstream engine. The Slipstream engine is a UI5-based rendering engine of classic DIMPRO transaction that is contained in the SAP Screen Personas add-on. So if you have Personas already, you have that already on your system. If not, get the SAP Screen Personas add-on, which is included in your NetWeaver licenses, and it comes with a Slipstream engine here on the right side. And this one will already give you the Fiori experience, at least from a look and feel perspective, on your older ECC systems. However, when you talk about the Fiori experience, you can't just talk about coloring or icons. Fiori experience is more. Fiori experience is being role-based, only giving the information to you as an end user that you need at this point in time, and not a huge bunch of fields that somebody else might be using. So I'm not bashing our classic transactions here, absolutely not. These transactions have been built to support a huge amount of customers, and even at one customer, a huge amount of different roles. So there's everything in there that you need to create, modify, change, display your sales order or any other business object. So that all makes sense. But using personas, you can actually take that one source of truth, your transaction, and build different views or flavors, as we call them, of one transaction and tailor that to a specific end user. So you can tailor a transaction screen by removing all the fields that a specific role or a user with a specific role never needs to use. So you just remove it from the screen. By doing that, you reduce the complexity. Reduced complexity usually results in two very important things. First of all, less training required, less complexity, less training, less costs usually. And the second one is lower amount of mistakes. So if you have a complex screen to fill out, there's a higher chance that you make a mistake that can cause actually trouble later on if the mistake is not early caught. With personas, you can simplify, limit the view or limit the part that a user can actually change to what the user is supposed to change. And by that, you achieve a lower amount of mistakes and issues and less complexity, resulting in less required training time. But again, I think I'm talking too much here. Let me show that to you. And again, we come to my favorite moment of today, the embarrassing moment of switching my displays here. And let me go to Chrome here, and I will now connect to my backend system using our Slipstream engine. And you don't see my Slipstream engine. Why not? Now you see my Slipstream engine still not, but I will go there quickly. So I'm opening the Slipstream engine over here. And oh, that was too fast. I don't want to show you that theme yet. So I'm opening the Slipstream engine. As I mentioned before, that's a UI5-based application, and this one might look familiar to you. That's a classic SAP Easy Access menu. I can enter transaction code here. Let's go to VOF5N, for example. I see the classic transaction. I can execute it. So pretty much that is your full SAP system as you would see it in any other of the other rendering engines. It has now the Fiori 2 theme applied, so you see the look and feel. But you might or might not agree to me, the screens are still very complex. And that's, again, where personas comes into the game. Here I'm in transaction VA03 and displaying sales order. So let's have a look at this transaction and maybe remove some redundant information and simplify things so that it's easier for me as an end user to use. So I call it now simple sales orders, and I give a meaningful comment and say create. So what is happening now is SAP Screen Personas actually disconnects my screen from the backend. So when I now interact with the screen, I will not do anything on the business data anymore, but now it gives me an overlay on top that has all the information about the screen that's being rendered. So I can, for example, select a container here. Actually, there's no reason for a container. I just remove that container and flatten my objects a little further down. I can select another container here. It's amazing what containers we built in here in these applications. And now I'm actually where I wanted to go. And as you can see, sold two-party and ship two-party are exactly the same here. And I know there's a reason that this is separate, but many times I've seen that this is usually exactly the same. So in my organization, my own companies that I just invented, that is always the same. So I want to have that hidden. Nobody should even see that. And seriously, who calls something a sold two-party? It's a customer, period. So I can also change labels here. I could, if I like to, move it to the left or to the right. So all these visual things I can do here, but I can also move things a little better together. So the table is very important for me. So let's get that out of the tab strip here. I want it at a different position. And I think that's not fully out yet. Let's move it over here. And I know there's something in the second tab that I actually need. And I find it very annoying that I always have to click between the tabs when I want to get this information, because I'd like to see this requested delivery date. So let me also copy paste this. And you might already notice that the skill set that I need here is really the skill set of a PowerPoint user. You need to be able to select objects, you need to be able to drag objects around, and you have a very simple interface here, and it actually hides that tab strip. I don't need it. And let's put the table here. Maybe the table is a little wide, so it doesn't look good. And I can pretty much rearrange the screen and only present to you what you in the end need on the screen. And once I'm done, I'm pretty much clicking on save, clicking on exit, and now my screen actually becomes live. I'm now again connected to my backend system. I can interact with everything, and this screen is now shown here. And since I like that more, I want that always shown. So I now make that my default screen here. And from now on, whenever I as a user come to VA03, that screen will be shown to me. And if this makes sense not just for me, but maybe for a complete group of users, I can also assign that specific flavor to a specific PFCG role, and then all users with that role will always get that flavor. Now you might say that the screen looks ugly, and you're totally right, but that's not the fault of the tool. That's actually my fault, because I'm an architect, period. So I'm not good in design. But we also have some tools here that allow you to make it nicer. So if you want, we can also apply a different theme here. So I'm on my system here, and look, I have a theme that looks pretty much like Fiori 3. It goes at least in the direction. So Personas also allows you to do these changes that apply then visually on all the different screens. So if your company has red and white as the main colors, you could do that, or things like that. You can completely do in Personas as well. So the question was, will there be an integration of Fiori elements with templates in here? I have to explain a little more where the question comes from. You seem to be a Personas power user, because in Personas we also have a template feature, and that template feature you can also define specific structures that you always want to use on screens, and then you can just apply that template on a screen and make sure that you also have a consistent user experience on these different screens. Now back to the question, do we will we put Fiori elements in there? Not directly we're putting Fiori elements in there, but you might have seen we have already published a few templates on our flavor gallery. It's actually more than a flavor gallery these days. And yes, we're consistently looking also to try not just having the templates to make everything in Personas more consistent, but getting closer to what you also have in your Fiori applications. So we are aiming for providing templates that help you to be even more consistent with applications that you build with other frameworks. Yeah, that's pretty much Personas. Let me go back to my slides, and don't get too excited, Peter, because I have one more slide I have to speak about. Just a summary of Personas. I'm not going through the whole summary. I mentioned it all during the demo, but the piece that I want to mention, which I have not told you yet, is actually mobile. Personas, or especially the Slipstream engine using UI5 underneath, is completely mobile ready. So you can render your transaction on your mobile device. And I'm not talking tablet here only, I'm talking also your phone. As long as you have a modern browser on that device, you can render the Slipstream engine, you can render your transaction using the Slipstream engines there. But again, something I have to mention, you can of course now render ME21N on your mobile device. You can render VA02, and I see people smiling already. It works technically, but your users will hate you And trust me, they really hate you. And that's where Personas again comes into the game. In Personas, you can build different flavors for one transaction, not just for a specific user or a specific role, but for a specific context. So Personas, or the Slipstream engine, is able to detect, oh, I'm running on a device with a smaller screen, and then it can switch to a different flavor you've built just for that screen. If you rotate the screen, Personas can also, Slipstream engine can also detect this. So you can actually build a responsive experience using Personas and the Slipstream engine based on your classic transactions. And now, Peter, since I've talked way too long, you need to help our customers to find out what are the next steps.
Okay, sounds good. And what Tobias mentioned about turning the phone on the side, we have one customer who uses it for sales order processing. Typically, they type it in landscape mode. And if they need to add a long text, they just turn the phone sideways. It brings up a new flavor with the box. They type the text in, save it, and then they can go back to portrait mode. So very cool application of using the Slipstream engine for mobile rendering. So before you say, wow, I'm so excited about this stuff, I want to go back and start changing everything, you're not going to be able to transform every single screen in your enterprise overnight. If it was possible, we would have done it already at SAP. So first is identify the problem you want to solve. We often recommend using a structured methodology such as design thinking. There's a number of design thinking sessions available to you out on the show floor, so I'd encourage you to check that out if you're not familiar with it. Basically, it's putting yourself in the user's shoes, applying a lot of empathy, trying to understand their needs, asking why, and then that's going to help you come up with a better outcome. Next, simplify the business process. Don't just say, oh, well, we've always had these transactions, let's just keep these transactions. Yes, there's a reason that we built transactions a certain way. If that still applies to your business, you should absolutely keep it. There's very good reason for it. But if you're doing something else, or if you can flatten the screens and combine a single screen using screen personas into multiple transactions behind it, or you're building something new, don't think you have to follow what's always been done. Notice to this point, we haven't touched any screens. We're looking at business issues here. Once you understand this, then you can determine the appropriate technology. Is it something new? Is it something old? We'll jump to a flowchart decision tree on the next screen. Then you build your apps or flavors, and you'll notice the little asterisks on the slide. In all cases, except for determining the technology, work closely with your users. Figure out what they need. Don't surprise them with something new and exciting. We've had customers who've done that. It didn't end well. The end user said, oh, where's the button that used to be here? No, you need to ask, work collaboratively, and they took a step back, involved the users, and then everyone was happy. When you deploy it, also involve the users, and very important, calculate the return on investment. What are the productivity savings? How much are you saving in training time? What's happening to the error rate? All these things may allow you to self-fund this and not have to go back for money to apply these changes. So a quick decision tree, highly simplified. First, you're going to start with design thinking, understand what is the problem you need to solve. You'll notice all cases you will end up with a SAP UI5 Fiori app at the end. If it's something new, if it follows one of the common floor plans that Tobias showed, then build that app using Fiori elements and you'll have a UI5 app. If it's something different, then develop a freestyle app. If it's an existing scenario, does it exist in the reference library? Obviously, the number of apps available depends on many factors. I didn't go through all the filters in the app reference library. Take a look. If it meets your needs, then great, you're done. If not, then you can simplify the transaction code. And again, in all cases, you're ending up with a UI5 application. We often get asked, well, who needs to be involved in the team to build this? You need someone with some business process expertise. You also need someone who understands the tools. If you're using Fiori elements, you need someone with development skills. If you're using screen personas, yes, there was the drag and drop PowerPoint style that Tobias showed. underneath that, there's a very powerful scripting engine, so JavaScript skills would be helpful. So someone who knows the tools, and also don't neglect design. We've had a number of customers who simplified the screens, rolled them out, and at first glance, it looks just like a simplified SAP GUI screen. Their users were thrilled with it, but if you're going to go through the trouble of simplifying the screen, you might as well put some nice design on it. And the designers also have the ability to work closely with the users, do some research, and maybe uncover some needs that weren't so obvious up front. So I know you're really excited to go and try this and simplify everything. 3 tips. First off is keep it simple. Don't take the most complex scenario that bothers people in your enterprise and decide, hey, let's start with this because it'll delight people. You'll probably trip over doing that. Start with something simple, get a win, ideally get a quick win, and then move on to the next one. You'll need to balance the functionality. Obviously, if you want to make a really complex app that does a lot, it's going to be multiple screens. Maybe think about how to trim it down and be like Fiori, where you have simplified apps that do one thing. In many cases, you've got a big SAP GUI transaction that translates into multiple Fiori apps because that's how people think about getting the tasks done. And also think about how people will use it. Not every transaction needs to be mobile. If you've got people doing maintenance orders, that's a great scenario where having it on a mobile app makes sense. If you have someone reconciling the books on a monthly basis, probably they're not going to do that from home or on the road. They're going to be sitting in front of their big monitor so they can have all the tools at their disposal. So think about the form factor. And I think we've got a number of resources available. Probably best bet, SAPFioriElements.com will get you pointers to everything else on the page. We're starting a Fiori Elements newsletter. So if you're interested in that, snap a picture of this or just type the URL that's on there. I don't think this is in the handout slide, so I'll step out of the way if you want to grab a picture of that. Also, see us afterwards, and we can give you the link. I think we're running a little short on time. That's why I'm rushing here. And there's another one. Lots of information on Screen Personas available. Open SAP courses, an SAP Press ebook. Once again, your go-to is the product page, sapscreenpersonas.com. That's also quite easy to remember. And now, getting started, a quick checklist. Figure out who is going to be your UX transformation champion. Since you're here at TechEd and you're attending this session, it's very likely you. Take the Open SAP courses. There's classes on UI5, Fiori. We're developing a Fiori Elements class. There's 3 classes on SAP Screen Personas, so lots of free information available there. Complete a pilot project and get into production. No reason that you can't have a pilot project done inside of probably 4 to 6 weeks, and perhaps less than that. Okay, thank you for sticking with us throughout. As a reward, actually this was going to be the prize for the quiz, but we didn't know that when we did it. So if you want to talk to other customers about what they've done in terms of their UX transformation, if you want to talk to some partners, some boutique UX shops, so that's Mindset, Convergent IS, and Bluestone X, who've done many UX transformations, they will be there. So snap a picture if you're available tonight and want to talk user experience with other customers. Some will probably be further ahead on their UX journey than you, and they can guide you along. You may bump into people who are not as far along, or maybe haven't moved to S4 and you have. You can help them along. Always a good time, and the venue is really nice. We have a private room there, so please register and bring your show badge when you come out. Now, the quiz. 3 things to remember. Okay, UX transformation drives agility. Multiple options. Last one. Okay, thank you very much. There's lots more information available for you through the learning journeys at TechEd. We encourage you to go online to the SAP online community, answers.sap.com, blogs.sap.com, and some other sessions that you might find interesting, hands-on for Fiori Elements and for Screen Personas. Thanks for coming.